make sure to triple check your gear. Did you all use the packing list I sent you? Jerry asked for probably the 20th time that day. I smirked. Sure thing, Jerry. Thanks for looking out for us, I said, looking at the others a bit tongue-in-cheek. Rick mirrored my response, opening his backpack in a facetious frenzy. After a good laugh, Veronique interjected. You're not taking the catacombs seriously, she said, her black hair laying over thin shoulders. She looked a bit like a Tim Burton character, with her gaunt eyes and pale corpse-like skin. You're only as safe as your group's weakest link. In response to this, Rick looked at me with facetiously wide eyes, in a we're fucked then kind of way. The four of us began our trek through the catacombs. The entrance greeted us eagerly. The darkness seemed to emanate from the mouth of the cave, meeting us in the daylight and beckoning us inside. I blinked, and the effect disappeared. Just a couple of days prior, we'd made a post on Reddit asking for a guide to take us through the catacombs. We received an offer from Veronique, and despite her account being only a couple of days old, Rick and I accepted her offer. Jerry would have preferred a more reputable guide, but acquiesced. Rather than the entrance available to tourists, she took us to a lesser-known entrance through a sewer opening. Despite his best efforts to hide it, Jerry shook like a leaf as we walked through the damp hallway. Brown ivory skulls lined the walls, as expected. Despite being a candidate PhD in anthropology, Jerry was visibly uncomfortable. He wanted to explore the catacombs to inform his thesis, which was a cross-cultural comparison in funerary practices. He didn't want to go alone, so he offered us use of his cave gear in exchange for our company. Rick and I were in it for the adventure, and Veronique was in it for the $500 we had offered her. Given her grouchiness, I think she was beginning to regret the decision. None of you brought any food? She asked, increasingly incredulous at our lack of preparedness. It's an afternoon trip, Rick shot back, a bit defensive. We can go 4 hours without eating. Veronique didn't reply. We pressed on for about an hour, Veronique navigating at the front of the group. She gave directions in her thick Parisian accent, and we fell into a steady walking rhythm, or so I thought. Veronique, do you even have a map? Jerry asked tentatively. Veronique put her hand up abruptly. Stop, she ordered. We did, surprised. She snapped her head back at us over her shoulder, her headlamp flashing just to our left. I turned just in time to see a shadow duck around the corner we just passed. I felt my stomach tie up in a knot. Were those fucking footsteps? Jerry asked, clearly rattled. There must be other explorers nearby, Veronique replied. But there are no intersecting paths, Jerry replied shakily. We've gone down a straight tunnel. Anyone in the hallway with us would have come in from the outside. And why would they turn around so suddenly? Rick pinched the bridge of his nose in clear frustration before walking up to Jerry and putting a hand on his shoulder. Jerry, you're giving me a fucking headache, he said. Just keep working on your notes, he added, before lightly slap-tapping Jerry on the cheek. Jerry turned red and went back to following Veronique, who looked upset on Jerry's behalf. I gave Rick knuckles because that shit was funny, and it immediately relieved my anxiety. We kept going, getting a little hungry about 2 hours in. We only occasionally heard the extra set of footsteps. It's a cave. Of course we're going to hear others' movements echoing through the system. No big deal. Rick and I contented ourselves to following Veronique and Jerry, who'd struck up a conversation about death and the perceptions surrounding it in French culture. The people buried here didn't want to be here, she explained. Its spirits are restless. The city built the catacombs because there were too many burials and not enough available cemetery plots. Medieval Parisians wanted to be buried near churches, not in underground caves. Instead of resting in consort with God, they're trapped here with each other, spending their time looking for others to join them in their eternal slumber. Jerry listened intently, jotting down notes. Veronique paused in front of a fork in the path. Should we go left or right? She asked flatly. Shouldn't you be telling us? Rick said, visibly bored. He turned to me. Waste of $500. He passed Veronique and veered left, probably choosing that direction for no reason in particular. I hurried to keep up with him, leaving Veronique and Jerry behind. Wait! Jerry followed, his too large backpack thumping his lower back. Veronique followed slowly behind. Just as he caught up, our headlamps all turned off simultaneously. We all let out some expression of surprise, except for Veronique, who stayed quiet. Whoa, Okay, Rick said. We just have to fix the headlamps. It was the first time that uneasiness had crept into Rick's easygoing manner. How did all 4 lights go out at once? Suddenly, the footsteps came back, this time at an all-out sprint. Holy fuck, Rick let out, precisely encapsulating my own feelings. I heard him run towards the far wall. I ran to the one closest, planning to flatten myself against it to avoid whatever was making its way towards us. Expecting a cold, hard stone wall, I felt a surprising, attracting force towards the wall like it was trying to absorb me. The footsteps reached us and stopped abruptly with a loud thump. Rick wailed in pain. The footsteps kept going past us and faded into the distance. Our headlamps returned. When our lantern's light returned, I was surprised at how little we could see. Our narrow beams of light offered a small spotlight in the oppressive inky darkness. Rick was laying on the ground, his fists clenched and raised just over his waist. His veins were bulging out from his neck with strain. He was squeezing his eyes shut and clenching his teeth. "My leg!" he moaned. "Oh, my leg!" I turned my headlamp towards his legs. His left shin was folded into an unnatural L shape. Veronique and Jerry immediately went to work, the latter building a splint with our available materials and the former retrieving medical supplies. "We need to leave," I said in a weaker voice than I expected. Nobody protested. The problem was, we were so turned around that we no longer knew from which direction we came. I think Veronique just picked a direction, and we followed. "Guys, can we stop, please?" Jerry tentatively asked, breaking the silence that we held for the previous half hour. None of us replied, but we obliged. Jerry squatted down and looked at the markings on the ground. I approached him from behind to see what he was examining. We were looking at hoof prints in a pile of shit. He adjusted his glasses with a shaky hand. "So, aside from the hoof prints, which are unusual in and of themselves," Jerry said, before clearing his throat, "this dung is cylindrical and firm, both hallmarks of a carnivorous diet, in contrast to the herbivorous diet typical of hoofed mammals." He stood up unsteadily. Rick hadn't spoke since his leg had been broken. "Let's move," I said. Jerry nodded. Veronique stood silently, seemingly staring off at nothing. "Help! Anyone?" We froze. A voice, unmistakably a child's, came from the depths of the shadows ahead of us. We all pointed our headlamps in the direction of the voice, which revealed a sharp turn. "Help, please. I can't find my dad," it said, beginning to cry after saying the last word. For once, Jerry didn't hesitate. "Jerry, wait!" I pleaded, desperate, but Jerry had already shed his bag and ran over to investigate. When he reached the corner, Jerry looked into the space obscured to us by the wall and turned back to look at us.
"There's nothing there."
A large, black, gorilla-like hand clamped violently over his face, covering it completely. We only briefly saw his flailing limbs as he was swiftly pulled into the obsidian black, the room filling with the sounds of Jerry being pulverized and eaten. I heard a wet, sickening crunch that must have been his spine. Veronique stood, motionless. I immediately set to carrying Rick in a frantic, unsynchronized limp. Anything to get away from the sickening, wet sounds of dismembered corpse. I didn't think twice about abandoning our guide. We made it around an unfamiliar bend in the path. The surroundings were surreal. The way was illuminated only by my bounding headlamp, a single beam of visibility among a sea of black. No matter where I looked, one skull or another grinned at us, lifelessly, a reminder of our increasingly inevitable doom. After what felt like an eternity, we came across another explorer. He was tall and well equipped with cave exploration gear. Hey, I said, getting his attention. He looked up at me, nonplussed. "Hey, fellow explorers, having a good—" I cut him off. "Move, now! There's a fucking—" I paused, not knowing what to call it. "Something back there ate Jerry, and Veronique's gone, and Rick's got a broken leg. We need to go before—" I rambled incoherently in a complete shock. The stranger, seeing Rick's leg, swept up under Rick's shoulders and took the weight off for me. I collapsed. "It's okay, my friends," he said reassuringly. "The catacombs make crazy people of us all. Rest now." He laid Rick down next to me, giving us both a pillow and thermos full of soup. We're not safe here," I choked out, sniffling. I felt like a child explaining to his father that a skinned knee really is the end of the world. He smiled at me, knowingly. Drink the broth. You'll feel like a new man. I drank from it greedily, feeling a distinct lack of control over my actions. I finished the thermos, placing it aside, as sleep rapidly overtook me. After an indeterminate time, I woke up to the sound of buzzing flies. I turned to Rick and flicked on my headlamp. He was completely flayed, his bright red skin glistening in the light of my headlamp. I could see each muscle, tendon, and major veins in gruesome detail. Hauntingly, his bulging eyes turned towards me. "Help!" he rasped, slowly reaching a hand towards me. I made a wild sprint towards anywhere, my headlamp bounding around in a claustrophobic darkness. My legs burned, their weight like iron pulling me towards the floor. It was like my bones yearned to join the leagues of ivory remains that surrounded me. I exited the other end of a fork. At the end of the hallway stood a figure, clad in bright orange and a yellow helmet.
"Hey!"
The voice yelled in a manner to be heard, not to intimidate.
"Tom? Tom Johnson? Is that you?"
I froze. It knew my full name.
"You're safe, buddy. I'm here. I'm tethered to the nearest exit. We're going to get you home."
I paused. The prospect of rescue was tantalizing, but I wasn't a fucking idiot. With one last wistful glance towards salvation, I turned the other way, continuing my sprint.
"Wait, no!"
I heard the man shout behind me.
"Come home, Tom!"
I couldn't get Rick out of my head. Maddeningly, I don't think I ever stopped hearing the footsteps that had begun so early in the trip. And where the fuck did Veronique go? That bitch, leaving Rick and I behind while Jerry was put through hell's meat grinder. The dizzying madness of the catacombs was getting to me. Timeless, still, yet teeming with restless dark that seemed animate. I couldn't trust any of my senses. But when I saw a looming, barrel-chested figure with horns at the end of a long hallway, I trusted my eyes. Its shiny bull ring contrasted with its midnight black fur. It was like a satyr from hell. I turned in the opposite direction, no idea if I was backtracking towards the Trojan horse rescuer that had beckoned me just minutes before. The bull creature was much faster than me. I had at least 20 feet on it, but it closed in like I wasn't even moving. I had to make a move. Approaching another fork, I took a blind risk. Removing my headlamp, I launched it to the left while I myself ran to the right. I heard and saw it clatter away, going down a steep slope. The side I picked was a dead end with an alcove. I quickly tucked inside it and hid from the hell beast just outside. My ploy worked. It ran in the opposite direction, its thundering hooves deafening me as it passed. In the echoing hall, the decibels threatened to leave me with permanent hearing loss. With my ears ringing, I sat back into the wall, equal parts relieved to be alive and scared that death would have been preferable. I quickly realized I had sat on something, a tough, clearly man-made fabric. I took out my phone to use as a flashlight and saw a familiar fluorescent orange. It was the rescuer, mangled inside his suit. He was disemboweled and clearly had been discarded into this corner. While the sight and smell of his butchering was unnerving, it paled in comparison to the crushing realization that my chance of salvation was genuine. I sit now in the dark. It's impossible to tell, but it feels like the room has shrunk since I lowered myself to the floor. The beast lurks. I think it knows I tricked it. It'll find me, and when it does, I will join the catacombs.